Yay! It's 5 questions time again, and this time the 5 questions come from 2 Christians, which makes it interesting. One of the Christians is a boy and the other one is a girl, and they sure like to smile a lot. But they don't seem to like listening very much, because they launch into the questions straight away by asking a question that somehow they know is very common, but the answers are very interesting anyway. But the fact that you're asking that question again indicates to me that you don't find the answers that interesting at all. You see, if that were the case, why don't you listen to the answers? Why do you keep asking the same question over and over and over again? If you were really interested in the answer, then I would imagine that your line of questioning would progress from asking the original question to then asking questions about the answers you received. If you keep asking the same question again and again and again and again, that means you're not listening. But let's get into it. The first question: what evidence would it take for you to believe in a God? What a bizarre question that is. Think about it for a moment. Why would somebody ask that question? Imagine we're talking with somebody who has actually got compelling, convincing evidence for the existence of their Yokomi-What's-It. They would just present their evidence, show it to us, communicate it to us, and then sit back and watch us fall over in amazement. But no, these people feel it's necessary to ask us what evidence would convince us. That, to me, is a lead-in question. A question leading into a confidence trick, a con job. Tell me what sort of evidence would convince you so I can go about fabricating it. That's what that's telling me. If you had real evidence, you would not need to ask this question. So any answer, any evidence you would present after me answering that question would be highly suspect. Of course, it also doesn't help that most theists, when they ask you about what you think about God, don't feel it necessary to explain to you what they mean by that word. Thankfully, these 2 little happy people feel it is necessary, and they actually do us the courtesy of clarifying what they mean when they say God. This is what they mean. God is a mind. A mind, of course, is a manifestation of physical interactions in a brain, for example, in something physical. It's a manifestation of how physical things interact in something as complicated as, say, a human or a higher evolved animal like a primate or a whale or something, in one of their brains, how that interacts. Or maybe in the future we may even be able to create artificial brains from which real minds would arise. That's all possible. But a mind, even though it behaves in a manner that is physically substrate independent, our mind behaves like software does on a computer, and software can run on any computer. It cannot run without a substrate. So if you're telling me that God is a mind, my question must be necessarily, where is the brain in which this mind resides? If you are trying to tell me that your God is a disembodied mind, a mind that exists outside physical reality, then you are basically telling me that your God, according to your own definition, is something real that exists outside reality. I am, of course, not willing to entertain such a ridiculous concept. If it's outside reality, it's not real. It's imaginary. You also give it properties that render it logically impossible. And you say yourself, your God cannot do something that is logically impossible, which of course makes your God not all-powerful, because it is subject to our human logic. How powerful is that? Not very. So there cannot be any evidence. Even if I were to take your question at face value and I was to honestly try and answer it, there simply cannot be any evidence that you could provide that would convince me that your God exists. Your God is logically impossible. Your God does not exist. Period. End of discussion. And the fact that we're dealing with a con artist here, or two con artists, becomes even more apparent with question number 2. Question number 2 is the trademark question of a con artist. The trust me question. You can trust me question. What would it take, is there anything I can do to convince you that there is a God? Think about that for a second. If there was evidence to be had for the existence of anything you claim is true, why are you suggesting, or why are you hoping that the fact that you are presenting this evidence, that you are the person talking to me, presenting your convincing argument, would make any difference? This is not how a convincing argument works. This is not how evidence works. This is not how you go about convincing people. Whether it's you or anybody else, presenting evidence should be completely and utterly irrelevant. So again, I can only ask you, why are you asking this question? Because to me it looks very much like you're trying to worm yourself in with a confidence trick. Present yourself as the nice little theist who is so willing to engage. Because you hope that personal affinity, a liking between yourself and myself, would lead to me letting my guard down and you sneaking in the sucker punch. It's not going to wash. The next question is truly bizarre. Now, before I continue, I would of course have to say, listen, your God does not exist. To me, that is self-evident, and it goes beyond question. I don't really need to go any further than that. So any follow-on questions that are about your God and about Christianity are really irrelevant. They mean nothing. They cannot mean anything to me as an atheist, and are just a waste of time, really. But on the other hand, it's fun to waste time, and that is why I will continue answering your questions. If you realized that an all-loving and logically impossible God existed, would you want a relationship? Well, from how you've described your God, it would be pretty much logically impossible, if we could even somehow tweak your definition of a God so it became logically possible. It would be logically impossible to not have a relationship with your God. For example, the fact that your God is all-knowing and therefore knows everything about me puts me immediately and by definition in a relationship with your God, whether I like it or not. So the question again is absurd, bizarre, and meaningless. What are you talking about? Now, of course, you proceed then by making the increasingly ridiculous assumption that an atheist would want to go to heaven. This is a place that does not exist, run by a God thing that does not exist, that is completely imaginary, and that is, by all accounts, from what I hear people describe it as the most mind-numbing drudgery that nobody who has ever taken the time to think about this to any extent would ever want to set foot in. So why do you think that anybody would want to go there and want to have a relationship with your imaginary being so that they can set foot in your imaginary happy place? It just makes no sense. Do you see how little sense your questions actually make? Now their questions 4 and 5, of course, again, indicate to me that we're dealing with people who are trying to set up a confidence trick, a con job. Because again, I fail to see how the demeanor of a person would make any difference towards what they are trying to sell me, what they're trying to convince me of. Have you ever met a Christian who lives their life in such a way that it is clear that they believe in an all-loving God? Well, no, of course not. Because think about it, such a Christian would never go to A&E, for example, if they broke a leg. Because the all-loving God, who is all-powerful, would take care of it, wouldn't it? Such a Christian would basically be physically impossible, would never be angry, would never say anything nasty to anybody, and would not fear death in any way whatsoever. Now, pretty much all the Christians I know go out of their way to live their life in accordance with, simple safety measures like putting on seat belts and things like that. So it is pretty clear to me that Christians, despite their asserted belief in an afterlife, do really realize that they're just as mortal as anybody else and act accordingly. But again, why are you asking this question? Why do you think that people living exemplary lives would make any difference toward the validity of their arguments? Again, that simply does not add up. Sorry. Your arguments for the existence of your God, your arguments that are geared towards making somebody like me believe that the fairy tales you're telling me are real, must stand on their own merit. It does not matter one iota who utters them, how many kind, loving, lovable Christians line up to tell me the same nonsense over and over again. If it is nonsense, if it's logically impossible, if it simply doesn't make any sense whatsoever, I will continue to reject it out of hand. So, to answer your question 5, the fact that I have or have not ever met any such people makes no difference whatsoever. Nor could it, and you should know that such a thing could not possibly make any difference. And I therefore do think that your 5 questions have a hidden agenda behind them. An agenda in which you are trying to gain the confidence of people who do not believe in the same things that you do, and you are trying to sneak in your belief system through a vulnerability of those people, rather than convince them on the strength of real arguments and convincing, compelling evidence. And I find that frankly disgusting and despicable. Sorry. You yourself finish your own video by saying, test everything, hold on to the good. That is exactly right. Test everything. Hold on to that does make sense, that does add up, and that has validity to it. That which doesn't must not be maintained. It must be discarded. It must go on the scrap heap of history. And your God is one of those things.